Today's plan is going to be to talk more about the shadow of the future, since we introduced that at the very end of last time, but kind of rushed through. So I want us to go over that again, and in a little bit more depth. But then also to think about the large-scale structure of some of the games we've already talked about. I talked to one of you for a while in my office about the upcoming homework assignment, and realized that a lot of people, I suspect, since it was a very good student who was asking me these questions, are not yet entirely clear about what a prisoner's dilemma or a stag hunt or various other things exactly is. And it's easy to be confused about that because people have certain, shall I put it, paradigmatic cases of this in mind, but then you can vary certain elements a little bit, and how far do you have to vary it before it's no longer a thing of that kind? Now, actually, this is not something that I think it's possible or even desirable to give very firm criteria about. And in fact, in the literature, people will distinguish strong or pure prisoner's dilemmas from weak prisoner's dilemmas, for example, and two different versions of the stag hunt and so on. So to some extent, you can think, how far do we have to vary this before we lose some essential characteristics? I think we can introduce a new term or two that will help us understand what really are the essential characteristics and will help you think through the homework. So, as I said there, for these purposes, almost a prisoner's dilemma or almost a stag hunt is going to be an acceptable answer. There are also going to be cases where it's none of the above. It's not like all the games out there reduced to one of these kinds that we've discussed. And in fact, it may be that typical in human interactions are games that don't have any of those structures. So it's important that we think that through. It's very tempting, actually, to read the literature on all of this and think, oh, game theory pretty much comes down to prisoner's dilemmas. And indeed, in his presidential address to the American Philosophical Association, Brian Skirms did something quite significant by saying, hey, there are also stag hunts, and maybe they're really fundamental for social cooperation. He's right about that. They are a fundamental kind. But if you stop and think just in terms of two-person games, and each one having two options, which is a very simple sort of case, most social cooperation involves far more than two people, and the people involved have many more than two options. But even in that simple scenario, if you think just mathematically, if we think purely about ordinal relations now, not about the cardinal values of the payoffs, but just what's my first choice, second choice, etc., and think about the possible forms of games, it turns out there are 144 possible forms. That's a lot of games. How many of them are prisoner's dilemmas? The answer is 6. How many are prisoner's delights? Well, another 6. Okay, how many are stag hunts? Actually, I forget now, but a similar type of number. And so when you start reflecting on that, you realize we're dealing with a few special cases. A lot of games are really none of the above. Or, well, almost this, almost that, but not exactly. And so we need to think about this in a much more general setting. Well, first objective then is to go back and think about the shadow of the future. Or the footprint of the future, as Axelrod is fond of putting it. If we want to encourage cooperation, how can we do it? Last time we went through a bunch of different ways. We can change the payoff. We can educate people. We can improve their recognition ability to try to remove the possibility of misinterpretation, miscommunication, misunderstanding what the nature of the game is, and all of that. We can also do things like try to make sure everyone shares the same goal. Everyone is on the same page, as it were. And we talked about various dimensions of all of that, but this one we barely mentioned at the end. Here's one way of thinking about this. It's sort of a dramatic version of the problem. I'm sure you've seen the Lethal Weapon movie, where at the end, Danny Glover's daughter is kidnapped. And Mel Gibson's character says to him, you know they're going to kill her, Roger. We're going to have to get our hands dirty on this one, okay? Now, he's utterly confident that these kidnappers do not intend to actually return the daughter, no matter what they do, even if they meet the demands. On the other hand, there are kidnappers in various relatively lawless places in the world, in northern Mexico, in Somalia, and so on, who actually most of the time do return the person if they receive the ransom. What makes the difference? How can Mel Gibson and Danny Glover be so confident that these kidnappers are going to kill the daughter and are not going to return her, while people do pay ransoms to these gangs in various lawless places with the expectation their loved one will be returned or their employee will be returned? How can we tell the difference? Yeah.
They have some expectation of kidnapping in the future, so that we need to have their reputation preserved as reliable kidnappers.
Good, exactly right. Are you a one-time kidnapper who's doing this just to get out of jail and you don't plan to make a practice of it? Or is kidnapping your thing? You know, CV, or resume, in other words. What did you do between 2005 and 2010 in Somalia? Kidnapping. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's the difference. Here's a nice way of thinking about it, and it is a classic prisoner's dilemma. Imagine that you are making a trade with someone, okay? But it's a trade that relies on a certain amount of trust. One version of this is a briefcase. You're buying some illegal drugs, let's say. And the idea is you come with a suitcase full of cash, they come with a suitcase full of cocaine, okay? You meet at the airport, you put your suitcase down for a moment, they put theirs down for a moment, they pick up yours, you pick up theirs. Notice you're trusting one another, that the thing they're giving you really will have the cocaine in it. And the thing you're giving them, they've got to trust that that really will have the cash in it. Suppose they get far enough away that they open it and they find out it's empty or it's filled with garbage. And the same thing, you find out this isn't cocaine, this is filled with sugar. Then, well, gosh, can you do anything about it? If this is a one-time deal, no, right? So think about the possibilities here. We've got, let's say, the dealer. We've got the buyer. All this is taking place illegally, we assume, and let's suppose it's really a one-off deal. You've never met this person before, you've never planned to do this again. After all, you're not really in the drug dealing business, but you just think, hey, tuition's expensive. How am I going to put myself through a UT if not for this? So you decide, aha. Now, in this case, what does cooperate mean for the dealer? Well, it means actually giving you the drugs, okay? Having the suitcase, can I draw an open suitcase here, that is full of drugs. Defecting here is giving you the empty suitcase, or there, that doesn't look much like a suitcase, it looks like a laptop computer. That didn't really help. I studied drawing for a whole semester. It's good. And then similarly with the buyer, well, you've got cooperate or defect, and in this case, cooperation really means having the suitcase that's filled with cash, and defect means having, well, in effect, the empty suitcase, the suitcase filled with something that will feel like that until they open it up. Now, what is your incentive? Well, suppose you are the drug dealer. Would you rather give the guy the actual drugs, or would you rather give him the empty suitcase? Clearly rather give him the empty, right? Now, that's true, moreover, no matter which of these is the case. Because after all, here you're getting a suitcase full of cash for nothing. Awesome, right? You can then sell the drugs to somebody else and get more cash. What about this? Here you're getting an empty suitcase. We certainly don't want to give them the drugs for nothing. So basically, this is going to be your dominant strategy. And similarly over here, would you rather give him the suitcase full of cash, or would you rather give him the empty suitcase? Plainly rather give him the empty suitcase, right? And that's true either way. This way, hey, I'm getting the drugs for nothing. Awesome. Here, it's like, well, wait a minute, he's not even giving me any drugs, so I certainly don't want to pay him the cash. So it turns out this is your dominant strategy. So we've got one Nash equilibrium. And what is it? It's precisely the scenario where an empty suitcase is exchanged for an empty suitcase. Or, put it, a suitcase filled with scrap paper is exchanged for a suitcase full of sugar. That's something that you could expect to happen if it's a one-off deal. Now, you might think, well, gosh, if that's what happens, neither one is going to do business with the other party again, right? But on the other hand, you might think, well, I never expected to anyway. But suppose you do hope that this is the beginning of a long and fruitful dealing relationship. Then you don't want to do this, right? You want this relationship to continue. So what makes the difference between ending up here and ending up here? In this sort of case, it isn't necessarily punishment. It might be, you're pretty confident you're going to a distant part of the world, you'll never see that drug dealer again, that person can't come get you. You're pretty sure you can all get away with this and law enforcement isn't gonna be a problem. And anyway, you've got this perfect excuse. Hey, I just picked up the wrong suitcase. I have nothing to do with these drugs or whatever. And so nothing about the scenarios we've talked about so far make a real difference. What does make the difference is the expectation of the future. And we can now go from this to the kidnapping scenario. Because here, the kidnapper is the one where the equivalent of this is actually returning the victim, right? The person being kidnapped. And here, it's claiming you're going to do it, but not actually doing it. Similarly here, it's really giving them the money that they've demanded, or the person in exchange, or whatever it is. And here, it's not doing that. And you would expect each side to betray the other, unless, as you say, they're in the business of kidnapping, and they have to preserve their reputation. After all, if they return this person dead, or don't return them at all after getting the cash, the next person who has somebody kidnapped is going to say, well, don't pay him the money. Just go in and try to find them and kill them. So, the expectation of the future is what makes the difference. So, let's assume that we do want to encourage cooperation. How can we do it? How can we make people think about the future? One thing, right, is the expectations. The expectation of future interaction. The Buddha has as one of his things on the Eightfold Noble Path, right occupation, okay? Not just right thought, right speech, right action, but the right pattern. You have to select the right profession, the right occupation. And certain occupations are ruled out for Buddhists as a result. Some of them are obvious given the nature of Buddhism and the desire to, well, overcome desire. In fact, it's nasty for me to put it that way. And so, for example, being a thief, clearly ruled out, right? But one of the things that's not so obvious that's ruled out in his list of things that's ruled out, and among them are things like brewer, since consuming intoxicants is bad, and so forth, is being a caravan trader. And when you're going through the list, you think, okay, yeah, can't be a brewer or a bartender, can't be a maker of weapons, can't be a caravan trader. What's up with that? Well, this is what's up with that, okay? If you are a caravan trader, there's no expectation of the future. You can't really be held accountable for cheating anybody. And if you can't be held accountable, and other people aren't really going to be held accountable for cheating you, basically, the Nash equilibrium is you both defect. You both cheat each other. And so the Buddha's view is, look, to put yourself in a profession like that is automatically to create a situation of temptation for both sides. Now, I don't know that he had any understanding of Nash equilibria, but I think there is a deep understanding of human nature there. The natural path is going to be for people to cheat one another. And so you don't want a profession that basically gives both yourself and other people the encouragement to perform immoral actions. So that's the idea. We want to encourage people to have stable relationships. So how do we do that? Well, one thing is we worry about the duration of relationships, as I was saying last time. We want relationships to last a long time, okay? If you expect that this is a short-term thing, it's much easier to betray the other person, because after all, you have no real expectation of much of a future, maybe a limited future. So the longer lasting the relationship is, the more the chance of cooperation. Conversely, if I don't want people to cooperate, I don't want the relationships to be long-lasting. So if we think about bad forms of cooperation, we think, ooh, how can we disrupt things? When people propose term limits for Congress, for example, this is usually what they have in mind. They think, yeah, I know what happens. People get to Washington, and then they make deals with one another at the expense of the public. Okay, that's a bad form of cooperation. I don't want them to cooperate that way, so I want to limit the duration of their stay. I don't want those relationships among legislators to be long-term relationships. I think it's getting a little better now, but for a long time, 97% of people in Congress were reelected. That was the reelection rate. It's phenomenal. And so those are highly stable relationships. And you might think, yeah, is that good for the rest of us? Maybe not. So anyway, this can be the kind of thing we want to be long-term. It's part of the reason people care about long-term romantic relationships or long-term friendships. The longer term a relationship is, the more there's an expectation of the future, the more there is this tendency to cooperate as opposed to defect. Well, there's also a question of the frequency of interactions. The more often we have to interact, then the more we're going to expect the future. Even if each interaction is very brief, right? We're going to be interacting frequently, even if briefly. So, I hope nobody has to interact frequently with kidnappers. But who is somebody you might interact frequently with, even though, it's not as if this is necessarily an interaction of long duration or even a relationship of long duration.
Coworkers.
Good coworkers are like this, right? You might interact with certain coworkers very frequently. You're often interacting because of your jobs. Other coworkers you may rarely see. Think about, well, this is a monstrous institution, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, it's just really big, but lots of companies, lots of organizations are very large. And you tend to work closely with and interact frequently with a few people, but other people you don't interact frequently with at all. And so how often here do I interact with somebody from, I don't know, just the history department? Well, actually very rarely. I have one or two friends over there. Occasionally I run into them on campus and say hello. But it's not a very frequent interaction at all, even though the building's right there. How often do I interact with anybody in the physics department? Well, I think the last time was in the 80s when I was on a quantum mechanics dissertation committee. Maybe that's why no one's interacted with me. In any event, most organizations are like that. There are certain people you work with closely all the time, and other people only rarely. The more frequently you interact, the more people care about, well, the next interaction. If we talk, but I think, when am I going to see that person again? Oh, it might be several years. Whatever happens now, we'll both have forgotten about, and so it doesn't matter so much. What are some other things we can do to encourage cooperation by enlarging the footprint or the shadow of the future, making the future more important to your current thinking?
Just an example?
Yeah.
Any example of this?
Oh, well, good. Let's talk about examples of ways in which we might affect this in an organization. Let's start with something super simple, a classroom. There's an unproductive interaction, okay? Two people in the back row are constantly causing trouble in my 8th grade geometry class. I am the poor teacher who's there facing middle schoolers for the first time. I think this is terrible. What do I do? How do I disrupt their interaction? Okay, I want them, good, I physically separate them, right? That's going to limit the frequency of their interactions. Maybe I can even transfer one into another class. That will make this a more limited duration type of thing. My daughter was really upset the other day because somebody got put in her class. And I don't know, I forget now what this is called, but elementary school teachers have a way of identifying problem children. There's some code word for them. And this was one of those code word children, okay? And she found out this student was in her class, and then she found out afterwards, wait, somebody said there was this code word child entering the school. That's the person. And then it was like, oh, what have you done to me? And it turned out well justified, because the next day this kid started throwing desks around the room and almost hit another child. So,
What grade?
this was kindergarten.
This is a strong kindergartner.
Yes, this is an 80-pound, rather strong kindergartner. This is a kindergartner that's built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and and has the personality of I don't know. Actually, Schwarzenegger. Yeah. Yeah, and I like the Terminator movies. It's like the kindergarten Terminator. So, so anyway, yes, that's a simple thing. But now, in an organization, we want to encourage cooperation. We come in and we realize, yeah, the people in this group aren't working together very well at all. The people in the organization, the groups in the organization don't work together well. What can you do? Yeah.
You can make it clear what the extent of the cooperation is. So if you're working together on a project, you don't want like separate reports to be filed into the boss, where the boss sees what one person did and the boss sees what the other person did. But the two people don't see what each of them contributed to the project. You want them both to have to, and you want it to be transparent with the contribution logs.
Ooh, good. Yeah, this is something we didn't talk about with relation to this case, but it's a nice one that has actually nothing directly to do with duration or frequency of the relationship. That has to do with transparency. Suppose I say, hey, none of this isn't a suitcase thing. I want to see the goods. Okay, and what's one of the first things that happens in any of these cop movies where there's some kind of exchange? They don't trust one another. There's like, okay, show me the money. You show me the girl. Okay, here she is. Well, all right, here's the cash. I have to open the suitcase to show you I've got the cash. Now, right, how do we make the trade? How do I know you're not going to shoot me as soon as I hand you the suitcase? So all of this is very delicate. It's all an attempt to avoid the prisoner's dilemma outcome of the Nash equilibrium. But notice how much easier it is if we can be transparent. For example, suppose there is a third party we can actually trust. And we say, you deliver the cash to the third party, I deliver the kidnapped victim to the third party, that person then exchanges it. There's a level of transparency there. Or suppose in the airport, instead of being the suitcases made of something I can't see what's inside, I say, it's got to be a transparent suitcase. Well, better be a pretty lonely place where we're making the exchange, because other people can see it now too. But that will make it so that I can see, at least if I'm good. Now, if you filled it with sugar and I can't tell the difference between cocaine and sugar, I'm in trouble. Okay? But what do people do in those scenarios? They say, open it up, let me taste it. And I know what sugar tastes like. I don't know what cocaine tastes like.
Always the little finger in the movie.
You're right. It wouldn't be this one. Oh, it shows what I know. See, I'd be a bad cop. Oh, it's the wrong finger, man. Shoot him. But also, what happens if you mix the cocaine with sugar? Wouldn't it taste like sugar? Oh, okay. Yes. Now, we have sometimes the Nash equilibrium doesn't happen just because people blurt out the wrong thing, right? Where do you want the victim we're supposed to return? That's like, yeah, we're supposed to say that out loud. So anyway, yeah, transparency can really help. If I know, and I know other people know whether I'm cheating or whether I'm being honest here, it makes a huge difference. And indeed, one of the things you see happen in the movies is people are trying to find ways of making this interaction transparent so I can tell whether I'm getting the real thing or I'm getting some bogus substitute. So that's a really important way to do it. So here's one thing I can do in the organization. I can make it really transparent who's cooperating with whom, who is contributing what, and so forth. And that transparency will help because in a way it's a way of affecting the payoffs, but it's also a way of saying, look, you can know whether this person is likely to cooperate with you or not, and so you know how to judge the interaction. This is actually the kind of thing that I think China and Google are trying to do by cooperating and giving everybody in China a social score. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's extraordinarily creepy. But basically, for being a good cooperative citizen, you will get positive points. And for being an uncooperative citizen, you will get negative points. And then, can we interact with you? Ooh, it depends on your point level.
Black Mirror episode.
Yes, exactly that, yeah.
Yes, Black
Or the
Mirror
Oh,
episode.
yes, like, yeah, the Black Mirror thing. So it's sort of like, oh, will we let you fly on our plane? Now, in the United States, we have a no-fly list, so it's a little bit like that. But here, most people are unaffected by that. It's a relatively small number of people who are on the list. But what if everybody has such a score? And so I go to the Southwest Airlines thing and think, oh yes, I want to fly to Las Vegas. And they say, nope, sorry, impure thoughts, low score. No Vegas for you. That's something that turns the government into something like the soup Nazi. To mix our TV references a lot here. And that's all going to be a way of saying, yeah, this transparency has advantages. It also obviously can carry some serious disadvantages. Just as going through the airport, if it's crowded with transparent suitcases filled with illegal substances, might be a highly dangerous thing to do. Now, what about these things, to go back to that? How could I increase the duration and frequency of interactions within my organization? Yeah.
So a lot of tech companies have open floor plans for one of the offices to increase the frequency, and also have lunch on campus, so you don't go off campus and you can just eat and still talk coffee.
Ooh, okay, good. So yeah, this is a way of affecting frequency of interactions. One is indeed this sort of open office idea. Now, people are finding out you can go too far in this. If you go too far, other people become a distraction. And actually, it's sort of obvious, I think in game theoretic terms, why there's a limit to this. How many people can you, in a lasting way and frequently interact with in a useful way? It's not that many. How many people do you want to talk to in an average workday and actually have enough interaction for there to be cooperation and so on? Probably not all that many. And so if we put you in a large room with 80 cubicles and hope you'll all interact, you're not going to get 80 productive relationships out of that. You'll tend to have people huddling in their cubicles thinking, oh gosh, it's noisy. But suppose we take 5 or 6 people, or maybe it can be more than that, maybe a dozen people we want to work together closely, and we put them in that situation. That can actually be highly productive. For some years back in the 1980s, I worked here in our Center for Cognitive Science. None of us, except the director, had a private office. We just had cubicles in this space that is now, actually, I don't know what it is. It's over in the geography building. Last I knew it was Asian American Studies, after they kicked us out because our Sloan grant wasn't renewed, even though we brought in lots of money from the NSF. They turned it into the Center for Folklore. I thought cognitive science to folklore, well, that's symbolic. But anyway, it was this sort of open office plan. It was the first time I had really seen that in academia, and it was actually really productive. It was a wonderful thing. There were philosophers, linguists, computer scientists, psychologists, all talking to one another, all interacting, often writing papers together, sitting around one computer, and so on. There was a big conference table in a part of it. It encouraged interaction in just this way. So within limits, I think this is one way of making this very effective. Your other is you're right, keeping people around. Keeping people around for lunch or recreation. Companies like Google will provide food in their offices. They will have recreation areas. A friend of mine works at a place here in Austin that's not actually that large a company, but they have a similar thing. They have a room where you can just go and, goof around, basically. Play instruments. They have a piano in there. He brings his bass guitar in there. They have an amp. You can plug in your guitar, your bass guitar, and just, you're feeling stressed out, you go in there, play for a few minutes. I hope it's well soundproofed. I'd hate to otherwise have the space next door was like, boom, 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 boom. But anyway, yeah, it's to keep you there, keep people interacting in informal ways. And here's one of the keys. It doesn't always have to be a work interaction. Just having lunch with somebody or saying, hey, how's your wife doing? I heard she was sick. Oh, all of that kind of thing keeps people sort of feeling a human connection that makes them more cooperative. Yeah.
They also have like softball leagues at a lot of tech places, and they also have like social events like Christmas parties. That's always really common.
Yes, exactly right. Parties, various forms of social events. Teams are often especially important because those teams make people work together in a different kind of way, but make people cooperate in a different kind of context. And if I've cooperated with you in one context, I'm going to tend to cooperate with you in another context too. It's like, hey, we were on the basketball team together, so that makes us interact in a different way in the workplace as well. Yeah.
But doesn't that lead into reputation? Like, I know that you're fun to work with, so I'm going to try to do that more.
That's true too. This helps to motivate people because it actually, here's part of what it does. To generalize, this builds what sociologists refer to as social capital. And to some extent, all of this is about building or destroying social capital. What is social capital? Well, it's basically the characteristic that a group is going to have whereby people have a sort of network of relationships that encourages cooperation and coordination of activities. So it is, you might just put it very simply, it's a network of cooperation. And if we want to build social capital in a group by building up that network of cooperation, we want people that interact over a long term. We want them to interact pretty frequently. And it really helps to get them cooperating in a variety of contexts. The more I see you as a friend, who I know in this respect and that respect, the more I'm going to be inclined to be cooperative with you in other ways. On the other hand, suppose somebody doesn't do this. It's like you never see these people outside of work. Well, it's very easy then to become nasty. Here's a question. Why is social media so awful? Why does it promote such nasties? Why is Twitter this cesspool of hostility? Why is Facebook a place where it's easy to take some friend and turn them into an enemy in a few seconds? What's going on there? Why is it different? Yeah.
Well, there's no real-time accountability. In real time, you can't choose not to respond or just walk away, but on social media, you have this kind of veil of not ignorance, but protection.
Ooh, okay, good. A lot of those people are people you don't interact with often, and you don't interact with in other ways. Okay, so think about frequency. Oh, it's not necessarily frequent. You don't see them outside of that context, so there's no other dimension to help temper this. And you're right, there's not all the other stuff. In actual human contact, as opposed to emails even, or Twitter comments, or Facebook comments, or anything of that sort, you've got all sorts of other things, right? I mean, here's somebody sitting here, and I can tell he's a human being, right? And it's kind of like, I have a certain fellow humanity with him. I don't want to do something that's going to upset him. I don't want to be mean. But suppose it's some person on Facebook, and maybe they're a friend, or maybe they're just some friend of a friend I've never even met, and they say something I think is outrageous. If I'm actually talking face-to-face to the person, I'm not going to call him some terrible name. But if it's like, I don't even know who you are, I might well call that person a bad name, right? Because it's like nothing else goes along. And in addition to that, he might think I've called him a bad name even if I haven't. Why? Because a huge amount we communicate through other means. Watch one of these videos with the sound turned off. I'm moving all the time. Indeed, one person commented on a video saying, this guy gets a workout every class. But, I am doing things with my hands all the time, my facial expressions, and I'm not thinking about that. I'm not planning it out. I'm not thinking, ooh, now we, what is the thing from Karate Kid?
Wax on.
Wax on, wax on. Yeah, I'm not thinking that, but it's just sort of happening. Oh, no, I was thinking about it. But ordinarily, we just do that kind of thing in communicating all the time. Take all that away, and it's much tougher. you say something that's a joke, right? And now people have these emojis to like indicate, haha, see, I'm joking or whatever. But
I always,
you know, it's important to do those because without those, you know, you say something in person and you're laughing. And people get it, it's a joke. If you say it online or in an email and there's no smile, people think, you know. And so in short, yeah, there is a lot of human interaction that is involved in just, even if it seems irrelevant, even if it seems behind the point, it's involved in building up social capital. I know for a while our advisors were advising all incoming freshmen, your first week, to go to talk to your professor in office hours. Don't wait until you've got some kind of problem, then you're going to be nervous about going. Don't be the kind of student I was who thought professors were a rarefied species and that it was rather dangerous socially to walk into their offices, so I almost never did. Especially as an undergraduate, I almost never did. But in effect, build up some social capital with the faculty members. And it's good advice, even if, as a faculty member who occasionally has 500 freshmen in my classes in the fall, I'm thinking, oh, you know, 499th person to come in this week saying, I just wanted to say hello. But still, it's good advice because that kind of interaction does break down barriers on both sides. And it makes it easier for the next interaction to take place productively and cooperatively, and even to just take place at all. Okay, so all of those strike me as good ideas. All of those are things you would want to stop doing if you see a bad kind of cooperation going on. Suppose you come into the workplace as the new manager, and you realize these people get along great with one another, but they don't actually do any work. Okay, every day it's somebody's birthday and they're having a birthday party. That takes up 3 hours. And then they all knock off at 4 o'clock to go enjoy happy hour. And they're all getting fat, by the way, this is happening. But, you know, they're enjoying their work, but like, what work? There's not much work happening. Then I may think, okay, there's too much social capital here, baby. I've got to do something to rein this in. And in that context, you might think, yeah, maybe I'm going to start breaking up this space into private offices. Or maybe I have to be careful about limiting the amount of time people spend on lunch, or say, who's having a birthday this week? We're going to have one birthday party, and it'll be for all those people, or whatever. So, in short, these give you ways of trying to change all this around. Well, anything else that we could do to basically either increase expectations of future interaction, increase transparency, or in some other way increase the footprint of the future? Yeah.
If you have like a sense of authority or something like that, like on social media and stuff, usually people who are more famous have more power or something like that, so people are less likely to, or more likely to instigate them.
Oh, right. That is true. And you might say this is actually connected to the question about, well, it could be connected to changing payoffs, it could be connected to increasing recognition abilities, but it's a matter of, let's say, creating a structure of interaction which is such that it promotes positive interactions without negative ones. I mean, people do this on blogs, for example, by actually not just having every comment posted, but moderating the comments. It's a way of saying, we're gonna filter out the most negative interactions. Maybe the authority relationships are very clear. So it's like, you might say that to a coworker, you really don't want to say that to the boss. Maybe you want to structure interactions in such a way that there is transparency. It's like, you know, any email you send to anyone in the organization, our IT group looks at it. That changes it. And if you know what's on your computer screen at any moment might be observed by the IT group, you might think, maybe I won't search for that strange thing. So in short, you can do things to affect the shape of the interactions through authority relationships, through moderation of communications, through just even the threat that a third party is watching has a huge effect. Yeah?
So when I was working at Blizzard Activision, when we get like a hard problem, and I would try to like do it myself, and it would take me like maybe 30 minutes to do it, they'll say I was wrong because I should have asked somebody, because I could have done it in 5 minutes. So it promotes the like interaction with the coworkers that way. You know, having like chaos for like, yeah, you did it right, but it took you much longer than just asking somebody to help you do it yourself, you know, so.
Well, that's true. Actually, great point. It's not just a question of authority relationships or monitoring to try to filter out any negative interactions. It is trying to say, from this side, look, seek out the help of people who can help you. And on the other side, mentor the people, okay, so that you provide them the help they need. Don't let them flounder out there on their own. Help them. And, you know, if you're the manager of this group, make sure you stay in touch with the people you're managing so you know. Let's make the relationships clear enough that you know who to go to with a certain question. In a lot of organizations, that can do a huge amount. Just who knows what? Who do I talk to if I need information about X, Y, or Z? And just knowing that can lead to much more cooperative and fruitful interactions and cut down on the wasteful ones. Because otherwise, you may be wandering around saying, I've got this problem about how to apply this tax law to this, the following kind of business, blah, 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 blah. And somebody says, I don't know, I don't do that kind of thing. And so finding the right person in the office who's the expert in that area is not always an easy thing. I occasionally have students come to me and say, gosh, I need help with a certain kind of problem. I want to work on this project. And I have to say, that's not my thing. You need to talk to person X or person Y. They're the experts in that area. And occasionally, not often, but occasionally we have a grad student who applies for the graduate program, and, or a prospective grad student, I guess I should say, and wants to work in some area that nobody in the department works in. And then we have to say, look, you're kind of applying to the wrong program. You need to be applying here or here. They have people who can help you with that. We don't really do that here. And so that sort of thing, just letting people know. I mean, on university web pages, we try to do that by having faculty listings where you can see, okay, what does that person work on? What do they do? Where are they expert? And few companies do that, but it can really help the people working there. Or, for that matter, the people outside interacting with them. Who do I talk to about this kind of question? Maybe you've been in a sort of phone loop where you call the main number and say, I need to talk to somebody about this problem. Oh, I'll route you through customer service. I have this problem. Oh, you shouldn't be talking to me, you should be talking to that person. Get to them and say, well, I don't deal with that, you know. And often you go back in a loop, so you're back at the beginning. It's like, oh, yeah, I talked to you a few minutes ago. So it's important to clarify those structures so you know who to go to for relevant cooperation. Any other ideas? Okay, well, we're almost. I said we were going to do this for about half the class. I wasn't very cooperative with myself in managing the time, but let's think about the different kinds of things briefly that we've talked about so that we're clear now on when we're in a prisoner's dilemma or something that's almost one or something else altogether. Here's a way of thinking about how to do this sort of thing. We've talked about prisoner's dilemmas, which are the most commonly dealt with problem in game theory. We've talked about prisoner's delights. We've talked about stag hunts. We've talked about games of chicken. And we've talked about simple coordination games. So let's think for a moment about what each of those involves. Prisoner's dilemma, we've dealt with enough now to, I think, get the hang of it. The thought is, well, look, in this kind of scenario, there is an unfortunate Nash equilibrium where both defect. So the idea is roughly this. If we both cooperate, that's great. We both get our second choice. And here I'll represent all these again as ordinal numbers. So not a cardinal payout, but rather second choice, whatever it is. Now notice, this doesn't actually have to be the same thing. You may have a much larger stake than I. So in terms of what the payoff actually is for the two of us, it doesn't have to be equal. But whatever it is, it's our second choice. Here it's our third choice. Here, if I cooperate and you defect, I get my worst choice. you get your best, and vice versa here. And so if we think about the dynamics of this, we realize I'd rather have my first than my second choice, my third than my fourth. So this becomes my dominant strategy. You would rather have your first choice than your second, and rather have your third than your fourth. So this is your dominant strategy. There's the Nash equilibrium. Notice there is one Nash equilibrium. Now, what's really special about it, what makes it a dilemma, is that we could both be better off if we did something different. It's a Nash equilibrium because neither of us can improve our situation given what the other person has done. However, we could together act to make ourselves better off, right? So the question to ask in it, is it a prisoner's dilemma really, is there another option here that we could both take action and both end up better off? So there is one Nash equilibrium, but we could both be better off overall. It's going to take action by both of us, though, not just action by one of us. There's a term that came up briefly in a question last time about Pareto optimality. There is a whole theory behind that. I won't go into all of it, but the idea of it is, can I improve my lot without making someone else worse off? If an outcome is Pareto optimal, I can't. Improving it for one person harms another person. However, here, we can both improve, right? So this is not Pareto optimal in the terms that economists use. There's a Nash equilibrium, but it's not Pareto optimal. In a prisoner's delight, the only thing that happens is these two things get swapped. So here, if we both cooperate, we get our third choice. If we, wait a minute, am I getting this right? Am I gonna screw this up? Yeah, probably, whatever. Actually, that's why I'm not labeling these, because the way I'm presenting it is fine, but it's not really appropriate now to think in terms of cooperation and defection in the same way. Because now what happens? Well, I prefer this. So again, this becomes my dominant strategy. You have a preference that goes this way. So this is your dominant strategy. Here, that's our Nash equilibrium. Now in this case, there is again one Nash equilibrium. But notice, now, I can't improve my situation. Not only given what you do, but we can't improve our situation by both acting. So this really is a Pareto optimal one, okay? We can't do better. We can't jointly, both, might say, do better. What happens in a stag hunt? Well, the idea is we have a choice of chasing the stag or the rabbit. Suppose we both chase the stag. We both get it. Yay, first choice. Suppose I chase the stag, but you chase the rabbit. Oh, well then you get the rabbit, and I get nothing. Suppose it's the reverse, then you get nothing and I get the rabbit. And suppose we both chase the rabbit, well then we have some chance of getting the rabbit, but maybe a slightly reduced chance because now two of us are chasing the same quantity of rabbits. What happens here? I'd rather get my first choice than my second. Ooh, but I'd rather get that choice. Sorry, now I've screwed it up because I've gone, these zeros ought to be fours. Sorry, I switched to, started thinking about, I get nothing, so that's zero, but that's not what I want to do. Okay, that's my last choice. So now I think, okay, so I don't have a dominant strategy here. And in your case, you're thinking, well, I'd rather do that, but I'd also rather do this. So you don't have a dominant strategy either. There are two Nash equilibria. Just see where the arrows go. Two Nash equilibria. But notice, one's better than the other. Okay? So one is clearly better. We both do better in that option. Okay, well, we're out of time. And these are the most important ones anyway. In a game of chicken and in a game of coordination, remember, there are two Nash equilibria, but neither is clearly better than the other. And so this is a case where basically the Nash equilibrium is one goes straight and one swerves, but it's a question of who does which. Here, we both drive on the left, we both drive on the right. But it doesn't really matter which of those we do as long as we both do the same thing. Here, it doesn't matter as long as we do different things. But that will help you as you go through. Think, who has a dominant strategy? Where are their Nash equilibria? Is one of those Nash equilibria clearly better than the other for both parties concerned? And that will tell you whether something is at least close to being a prisoner's dilemma, a prisoner's delight, a stag hunt, etc. And keep in mind, it might be none of the above. Lots and lots of games are just none of this.